Good morning. This panel is on new technologies and how these new technologies are changing the market of intralogistics and the supply. We wish to thank ISEM, that is among the organizers of this conference, and we wish to thank also our panel. We have so many experts of different sectors that will be telling us what's going on in this sector. And this sector at present is very important also for the public opinion, from the Shanghai port block to the Suez Canal, all these geopolitical scenarios that were simply unthinkable up to a few years ago. And then, of course, they are shattering also the market, our market, the warehouse market and the intralogistic market. So the new technologies also provide a number of opportunities that maybe existed already, but the present situation has, in fact, made all of them more highly on demand also by the market. We have e-commerce exploding. We have the just-in-time that has been creating a number of problems in the area of risk management. Who do not know exactly how to manage these supply chains that maybe were a bit too long. You will be telling us about this sector, because a sector that had very long supply chains and that are being stressed by this new situation. And first of all, well, I'm going to introduce our speakers, Alberto, Spinelli, Luca Ciaschini. I'm reading the names because the names have also changed over time. Matteo Bruzaska, Gianluca Grandi from Modula, Matteo Bruzasca from SWISSLOG, Mauro Corona from Dematic, and Stefano Pettinato from AUTOMHA, and Fabio Zucchini that I've already mentioned. Now I'd like to give you the floor. Maybe Fabio Zucchini can start to try and understand how you have been interpreting this change, and what are the new technologies that you may consider more important: big data, automation, artificial intelligence. All these things are coming along, and partially they're already there. I'm Fabio Zucchini, and well, of course, logistics over the last 4 to 5 years has been certainly at the very center of attention, and even more so over the last 2 years. And since I am the person in charge of the service, we have had well, servicing was the most important item, so having this plant move as soon as possible. So big data for us are useful to understand when a plant is, let's say, on the eve of a breakdown of some component. So we concentrated on that. So we analyzed the plant, seeing whether it was obsolete, and so understanding in good time what is the most important component to be managed, and also the remote access to the plant, to the system, so the possibility of being connected with devices, with increasingly smart devices. Initially, we just had this contact with the PC. Now we can really connect also with the inverter, with the sensor, so we can replan everything. So when a component breaks down, I can plan the replacement in remote. I can manage a customer, even a customer who is 4 or 5 hours away from our seat. I can tell him, well, change the component, replace the component, so a more rapid accessibility to the different devices on a given system, on a given plant, so we can give this type of service, and logistics runs more smoothly. Well, short contributions, and then we may have maybe a second round of the table. AUTOMHA, you have developed also digital twins. Well, I am Stefano Pettinato. I am a mechatronic engineer for automation and software department of AUTOMHA. I deal with virtual co-sharing. AUTOMHA has worked on the digitalization of the plant of the machines so as to have a product that is tested before being put on the market, both from the machine viewpoint and the system viewpoint. The digital twin, of course, for us, the digital twin is the virtual warehouse. So on the PC, we have the customer's warehouse already set up. And so we can study that beforehand. We can carry out functional analysis, understanding how the warehouse is going to work. If we can introduce some improvements that can be done beforehand or during the installation or even after the installation of the warehouse, and also revamping, so revamping the warehouse itself so we can manufacture the plant digitally, maybe a plant that was manufactured 10 years ago, and we can introduce some changes on the virtual warehouse. And at that point, when we are on site, of course, the work requires much less time. So the simulation part, so before the sale, and then there is the virtual commissioning that takes place during this process, during the production process, that has become essential. So it is part and parcel of our production process. We insist on that, on digitalization as well, and we may be going towards blockchain, so digitalization of everything, including the machine, so as to have an element that can recognize the machine and may tell us everything about the machine itself. So the digital twin is a marketing tool, but also an operational tool at the same time. It helps you to sell, but it also yes, of course, we can create the warehouse on the basis of a given rationale, so having the layout, and you can also modify the layout because, of course, nothing has been truly sold or truly created. So I can modify the product itself, and then when we start the production, the real production, I can test the automation software before going on the spot. So I reduce the commissioning time, and it is a good saving, both in terms of money and in terms of function. Modular.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Gianluca Grandi at Modula. I've been working at Modula for the past 25 years. Thinking about the 4.0 industry approach, well, Modula's solutions have always been at the forefront. We had already turned our operations in the wake of the 4.0 approach, because the value of an automated warehousing solution is the interaction with the rest of the corporate systems as well as operations. In the wake of Industry 4.0, we developed a solution, an in-cloud solution, that makes it possible for us to monitor utilities, plants, systems, in order to be on point with regards to maintenance and potential breakdowns. There could be systematic errors, and by tracking trends and patterns, we can diagnose the degree of obsolescence of the system that perhaps has reached end of life. Cloud computing was developed after the advent of Industry 4.0, but we also realized that the Americans, the Europeans, and also Far Eastern markets have demonstrated growing interest in that. The need has become apparent in that we must be predictive when it comes to preventative maintenance and be proactive in foreseeing potential breakdowns or downtimes for the system as a whole. Well, that's very interesting because apparently these technologies have already been developed across different types of industries, like Ukrainian tractors, John Deere tractors yesterday were halted yesterday by the soldiers, and so this is a remotely controlled piece of equipment. So that's quite striking. My name is Mauro Corona, and I am the trade manager for Dematic Italy, sales director, apologies, at Dematic Italy. And we at Dematic have developed different solutions over the years, and we have mostly pursued two projects. So first of all, the idea of disconnecting, quote unquote, from specific technologies. In other words, being able to offer technologies that are suited to customers' process. And the second pillar is knowledge of customers' processes in order to have a comprehensive snapshot of order entry, order management, timelines throughout day-to-day routines by way of data analysis. And this is possible nowadays in many different ways because we can tap into different sets of analytical data from our customers. And based on our experience, there is a host of data sets that are not available yet. So in a nutshell, we believe that data knowledge is essential in order to design the best possible process, select the best suited technology, and ultimately design the right process, and also propose a series of pilot equipment or a simulation technologies in order to simulate business strategies, for example, by accelerating refilling times in the various POSs, and see how the system responds to that. Data distribution is key when it comes to predictive maintenance, which we believe is an essential aspect. And Dematic Italy worked relentlessly in this regard by developing tools and solutions that enable the prediction of potential wear and tear and obsolescence of specific components. Great. And how good are you in tailoring your proposals on customers' needs? In other words, standard solutions versus tailored solutions. Where are you at in this regard? Well, I think that all vendors and all manufacturers in general try to standardize their products as much as possible. However, I would like to deviate from product standardization and approach the concept of product interconnectivity so that every technology works at best within a certain system framework and communicates in the best possible way with all the various system components in a very harmonious fashion. So we're talking about system customization rather than product tailoring or customization. My name is Michele Calabrese, and I chair the Service and Revamping Manager at CLS. And we propose automated solution for intralogistics, and we are specialized on horizontal components, and Many colleagues of ours have already pointed out the fact that this is an essential aspect of the intralogistic process, in that there are three main pillars. We have processing centers, we have storage and warehousing hubs that could be either manual or, if you will, automated, and then we have the horizontal transportation of goods, byproducts and finished products. So we interconnect all of these actors. We have a long history of forklifts and elevated lifts manufacturers in Italy, and we have worked hard on the so-called after-sale chapter. In other words, we design and sketch out the intralogistic process from scratch, so from data analysis to logistic flow standardization, as Mr. Corona pointed out a while ago, down to implementation and management of after sales. We do this in a predictive fashion by retrieving data from machine sensors or through electromechanical data retrieval in order to proactively fix any potential breakdowns or downtimes. I think we should focus on process digitalization because, machines, equipment are a tool to get to the ultimate result, but everything is made possible through a process digitalization, and this implies a standardization. And let me follow up on what you asked a while ago. So there is no such thing as a standard piece of machinery. We must look at processes in a more standardized fashion, in that we have to manage exceptions by predetermined processes or by way of predetermined functions that interconnect with artificial intelligence. Well, thanks very much indeed. Over to you. Well, my name is Matteo Bruzaska, and I am the marketing and commercial manager at SWISSLOG Italia, apologies. So SWISSLOG has several partnerships with different global providers. We work on the hardware as well as on the software components, and the hardware is another important ingredient of the equation because it must orchestrate with precision the various subsystems. So we have machines, processes and operators working in the warehouse. Digitalization is the foundation of the fourth industrial revolution, and we have talked about this at length. Incentives were mentioned, such as Industry 4.0, and these incentives have dramatically contributed, especially in Italy over the years, to push small and medium enterprises in this direction and to convey investments in order to implement this digitalization process. So, on the one hand, we have big data, and you mentioned that a while ago. So big data sets are retrieved from the field and from machines themselves. But after data collection and retrieval, these data must be precisely interpreted. And then we have the interaction of hardware and software solutions. So it could be a software solution such as warehouse management systems that interface with ERPs. And we are not reinventing the wheel. The concept of the cyber physical ecosystem is indeed very, very real. You also mentioned digital twins, and I would like, again, to go back to what Marco said a while ago. In our industry, we like to provide consultation to our customers in order to collect project data and anticipate what the final result could be. And we roll out dynamic simulations. And this is part of the digital twin concept, because in a way we are creating the system that the end client, that the end customer will use in a sort of a simulation environment. And during this design phase, we have to make sure that all the key and core components are taken into account. With regards to digitalization and innovation, and this is something we approached a while ago, a few years back. So, for example, augmented reality used for maintenance purposes. It was very fashionable a couple of years back in the marketing and communication domain. Now is part of our day-to-day working activities. A lot of our servicing teams and maintenance teams use augmented reality to fix our clients' problems. They can interface with colleagues who are located in central offices, for example, and they can be supported very well while maintaining different utilities, plans and systems. So all of these elements are already there. So it's now, so they're part of our day-to-day reality. And I guess that we're gonna start with the second round of discussions here, but let me finish up on that, because you mentioned two important phenomena, and let's step away from digitalization proper and look at the current scenario. So where are we at nowadays? What do the current scenarios derive from? And well, first of all, we had the explosion of e-commerce and online purchasing, which was also, pushed by the pandemic, especially with regards to e-grocery. That prior to the pandemic had never reached this skyrocketing numbers, and so consumers out there, due to the pandemic, started purchasing products that they hadn't purchased before the pandemic, and this implied a series of changes in terms of logistics and warehousing. We are addressing this need, and we are developing solutions that aren't that innovative in terms of technological solutions or products, but rather they represent a mix of technologies. So we are interconnecting and integrating different types of technologies nowadays in order to deliver maximum flexibility, scalability, and a modular approach. So, and this is pushed forward by e-commerce, and this has pushed us in tweaking and fine-tuning details, technological details, in order for certain systems to be used in certain physical domains or physical spaces. I'm not talking about large distribution centers, but maybe smaller ones. And the other phenomenon that I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues is this, the one that we are actually witnessing nowadays, which is part of the end wake of the pandemic, so shortage of raw materials, components that come in with significant delays, and so on and so forth. And this obviously has exacerbated as a result of the Ukrainian war. And this is taking a toll on this very aspect. This is also fueling new ideas, like, for example, to review the logics of warehousing. We've had very strong inbound logistics, and now we are contemplating the possibility of keeping stocks and shortening the supply chain. As vendors, as providers, this is indeed an issue. It's a problem, because we have to comply with delivery times and lead times and productivity timelines. So we have to juggle with all these elements.
Well, of course, because starting investments now, I mean, you would satisfy a demand, but you don't even know if the demand is going to be there. I mean, there are unknowns now that come from the supply of components and raw materials. So, Alberto and Luca, would you like to start, Alberto? Well, yes. Well, first of all, I am Luca Ciaschini, TEMA. Very few people know about us, equivalent drugs and some specialist drugs. So I work in an area that, of course, was affected by COVID quite remarkably. So on the first month, we had a 40% increase in our volumes, and our warehouse that was next to Codogno had 50% less in terms of staff. So we had to get organized because we had this ethical need of answering the patient's demand. And so this sector, the pharma sector, is not very digitalized as against other markets, very little logistics. Well, if we consider large distribution, the margins of large distribution led to continuous improvements over time. Pharma has modified the product, but not so much, has not been so innovative on the logistics. The main market, the equivalent market, must have adopt components that must very close to large consumption goods. So mine is an equivalent drug, so it is very similar to those of competitors. We have prices and we have a list, so who arrives first is able to supply the product to the patient. So initially, I insisted on digitalization because the lapse of time between what was ordered and what was delivered, of course, that is a very important lapse of time, because otherwise the prescription might even change. And this, if you see this lapse of time as such, of course, you draw an advantage vis-à-vis the market. I'd like to go back to what has been said by the last speakers, because we are moving towards that direction. We have tried to have a process digitalization, essentially. So if we know, electronic invoicing, that started with a test on pharma. There were very few companies, high-value companies, that was tested on pharma, and then the government realized it worked, and then it was enlarged. Then there was the electronic ordinance. There again, it started on pharma, and then it went over to all other sectors. Now we are speaking about the electronic TDT, because it is quite anachronistic to want a piece of paper that then no one is going to sign, and I mean, having everything digitalized. But now going back to the warehouse, in my reference market, I cannot change transport, because there are just two agents. That's the service, and that's it. I can change either the warehouse or my process in terms of acquiring the order and then transferring that to the person, to the agents who are responsible for transport. So today we are enlarging our boundaries, and so over the last year we have been used RFID on some packages of our wholesalers to reduce time, because I have one package coming from TEM and one from another client. Of course, we have enlarged the boundaries and we entered the customer's pallet assistance. We have a continuous improvement covenant with our providers, and one of the topics I insisted on, especially post-COVID and also in view of a number of problems existing in Germany, we have asked for an increase in automation, especially in the areas where we don't consider there is a maximum added value. Honestly, TEVA warehouse in Germany had problems in identifying staff, in getting staff that had the special certificate for forklifts. It was difficult to find qualified personnel. That is something that will happen here as well, and the transfer time of the goods is a time where the worker has absolutely nothing to do. So if we have the possibility of a rail transferring the goods from point A to point B, where the goods will be packaged. So I can't remember the names of the two gentleman who spoke last. But I mean, this is something we are considering with our providers, and this is in view of in an approach of continuous improvement, because that is something we are considering as possibilities for the next 2 years. Of course, you are of the area of large consumption. Are you using strategies of continuous improvement? Continuous improvement strategies, is that still on, or is it something of the past? This is a question for all of you. When we speak about continuous improvement, well, then people want rebates, they want discounts. I mean, this idea of continuous improvement is not so popular. We are carrying out this continuous improvement not only in terms of cost, because after a few years, I mean, if you don't have technological innovation, you may imagine whatever you want. You are going to do what? Innovate services. Well, a service approach where the cost is paid by an improvement in profit, an increase in profit. So what's going on in your area? Well, no. As Alberto Spinelli, Logistic and S&OP manager of Latteria Soresina. Before answering your question, well, our company over the last 20 years has had an exponential growth. It is doing well, very well, and when companies are doing well, I mean, it is difficult to ask the people who were at the origin of the company, well, going there and saying, well, we must do something different, we must do the Industry 4.0. It's not so much new technologies. Technologies are there, they're good enough. We must understand what is really useful. But the difficult work is inside the company, because making people change the way in which they've always worked, also in terms of decision-making systems, it is extremely complicated. Latteria Soresina over the last 3 years has been working on that quite extensively, maybe more than on investments, on pure investments in terms of automation. We have we have this automated warehouse being built for UHT milk. It was a cheap product, so we had to limit costs. And of course, the automated warehouse was not invented yesterday. It's not a 4.0 industry. But where is the new innovation taking place in processes? I am S&OP manager. My role simply did not exist in the past. Logistics and supply chain. You must govern these processes. So when you organize new processes, who is going to govern this process? Because otherwise, I mean, you make investments, but if you are incapable of controlling the process, then you may have made an investment, but this investment does not yield the added value you would have expected. So we have been investing on processes, digital processes. It means taking what has been working well. It is in the head of many and in the PC of others, and then it must put somewhere that will look as the heritage, so to speak, of the company. It sounds easy, but when the things are just in the heads of the people who have been working there for 30 years, first you have to convince the people, and then you have to find the appropriate processes to be able to digitalize what people only have in their heads, in their minds. And so we are having some success, but also many obstacles, because not all of them are willing to cooperate as soon as you ask them. You must organize different steps, because if these people are not coming on board, the whole company will get stuck. Well, yes, but introducing let's call it a contemporary warehouse means also digitalizing the company, so revising processes, because you cannot insert well, yes and no, because you don't have, I mean, for an automated warehouse, you don't have to digitalize the company. You have to switch from a forklift organization to labels or a digital system, but it's not a cultural revolution of the company as such. I mean, you have just changed the way in which, well, some pallets are being brought inside and outside the warehouse, whereas what we have been doing has to do with a revision of the demand, shared production order. It sounds easy, but it isn't. As S&OP managers, I have meetings with these, with the people dealing with marketing. It means eliminating conflicts. Well, this is the revolution we have been trying to do. Doing that, of course, it is easy then to speak about efficiency, because it is no longer considered as the intrusion of someone in your system. We all belong to the same team, and we want to reach the objective. The objective is service to the client. The client is paying for the whole process. Well, we're not good because I have been able to produce some pieces online, but because I kept a good a good control of cost, and people who work in the marketing area can sell at the appropriate price. This is the type of industrial evolution we have been developing, because otherwise you just make investments to introduce technology. And something else I'd like to mention. Now we have tax credits. Tax credits, of course, are a spur, are an encouragement to have this revolution, provided that the driver is not the tax credit. I mean, it's not just because you want to grab the tax credit that you make an investment. This is a big risk. Well, let's make whatever we want. I mean, let's do that before June so that we get the tax credit. But the true industrial evolution must look to the future. It's not just to grab the tax credit. Otherwise, there is no industrial revolution whatsoever. We are just grabbing some money. But that is not the objective of the industrial revolution. We'll be able to talk about that later. All industrial revolutions have always created rights. And I do hope that in the logistic as well, this industrial revolution will not just be a technological one, but also guaranteeing rights to many workers who still have no rights at all, because otherwise that is not an industrial revolution, that is a technological revolution, which is something different.
Fabio, do you want to say something? What was the question? Sorry. Well, there isn't actually a question proper. Would you like to follow up on what he said or add something to the discussion? Well, we said a lot about innovation, yes, but what about your role? I guess it's getting increasingly complicated because you are consultants that are meant to accompany business growth somehow. You have to sort of take companies by the hand. So I was just pondering on this because I think you have to plan out future developments. Well, a system integrator never starts from a client's project, but rather helps the client design their project. So that's our first approach. We need to start with data analysis. We need to map out the environment and the facilities, etc. And we consider the possibility of scaling it up and managing the system moving forward, also as a result of increased sales. Moreover, we also have to plan out for unpredictable happenings. So in other words, the system must be scalable in the future. And so this is the approach that all project designers, project managers and system integrators have with regards to industrial plans. Thinking about product hyper-targeting, as we call it, and e-commerce, I think that these are two key challenges of modern businesses. So how do you succeed in supporting production and manufacturing processes that are to be very modern, very versatile in terms of inputs and outputs? Well, this is our job. I mean, we have to think about flexibility when designing a system and the experience we have accumulated with the design of similar systems. And I'd like to echo what some of my colleagues stated earlier. So the products out there are the ones and the same, whereas the systems are very different from one another. So there is no such thing as the same system. So systems are very diverse, are very special, and this is due to the fact that there has been a host of technological advancement and obviously constant improvement. This is our approach in a nutshell. Thanks very much, Stefano. Well, I think it is essential to be able to accompany our clients and to adapt to their needs, so much so that customization is a key element. At AUTOMHA, we deal with process customization and product tailoring. Oftentimes, the same piece of equipment can be adapted to different customers' needs, depending on their requirements and desires. And obviously, our customers don't necessarily know the technological portfolio that they need to deploy, and that's why we need to talk them through. We need to explain them what we're offering to them. And in short, as you stated earlier, we need to be able to provide production outputs, hence to ensure that the transition to an automated warehousing will lead to process improvement. In order to do so, we leverage on simulations. So we discuss with the client how to optimize the process, how to guarantee certain results. There are a lot of technologies out there, but as the previous panelist stated, we're not simply called upon to use those technologies just for the sake of it, but we have to really understand whether that technology is needed and how it can be adapted and adopted. Well, a question about added value now. We know that a lot of companies working in the intralogistics industry come from two domains, mechanics and ICT, and then they evolved in different ways. Is the added value converging towards ICT or else? Or do we still have the right mix and match between mechanics and ICT? So, what's your take on that? I would say both. I've heard very interesting insights so far from all of the panelists, and we at Modular are, on the one hand, users, if you will, because I've been with a company for the past 25 years, and I've seen how Modular's intralogistic processes have evolved with the passing by of time. 20 years ago, for example, the mechanical components and the mechanical processes were completely outsourced. Now they have been insourced with a series of processes that were already compliant with the Industry 4.0 model when we first started out with those. In addition to that, our suppliers of mechanical equipment evolved in terms of interconnectivity, Industry 4.0 requirements, etc. So we became more efficient also in terms of production. Forget about 2020 because it was a bumpy year and we had to shut down production for several months. But if we go back in time, back to 2018, 2019, for example, we hit almost a 50% increase in 2021 in production terms, and this was made possible because the entire ecosystem had become interconnected in the meantime and properly managed. In our capacity as providers, as suppliers, at times we're stranded when it comes to data retrieval and data collection, because a small and medium enterprise oftentimes don't have them. And so it might be a bit difficult to suggest improvements in certain domains simply because of the lack of data. Conversely, there are a lot of companies out there who have a host of data, and it's like, getting on the internet without any search engine. So we wouldn't be able to locate and search for what we want to search. So in other words, Industry 4.0 is pushing us towards that, a kind of degree of sensitivity in terms of having data that are essential to improve processes. And we also mentioned incentive and subsidies cascading from Industry 4.0, and with regards to small and medium enterprises, most of the time, so they simply want to benefit from these tax allowances. But careful, because everything comes to an end, and when the tax allowance is used up, you're back to square one. So tax allowances or tax credits represent the mean and not the ultimate goal. They shall not lag behind, because otherwise it's difficult to catch up. Thank you. I just wanted to say something about the need for changing existing processes. And that's a given, and that's important every time you tackle like an automation project. But the two things are oftentimes interconnected, and this becomes manifest when we speak to clients, because someone says, we're going to do this now, and somebody else says, once we will be fully automated, this process will no longer be viable. And that's an important staging post, if you will, because the interconnection between automation and processes is a two-way exchange. In other words, it takes two to tango, because automation is essential to shape and change processes, and most of the processes that we work on are characterized by the fact that automation happens and is addressed on a step-by-step fashion. So there is some sort of a partnership between stakeholders, and so there is a series of sequential steps that must be very adaptive, because it's an intriguing phenomenon, I would say. Automation nowadays shall not be seen as a quick fix, like we talked about automated warehousing solutions, and the first one was designed back in 1974, so a long while ago. But we have to broaden our product portfolio, and we have to understand how the various products are combined with one another as a mosaic through various combinations. And we do that because we want to be conducive of automation, and so both automation and processes lead to important inputs for change. And then someone mentioned software, ICT, and mechanics. Let me just say one thing. I think that software solutions have a very important role in this regard, because when it comes to process change, software is core, and it's perhaps the most difficult ingredient within the framework of a large automation project, because in that we have to decide, change, and adjust process strategies. So now more than ever, I would say, software is and will be the core aspect of automation projects.
Well, digital normally means new business models. Anything going on in terms of new business models? And if this process revision that also means dismantling functions, may this lead to new products? We have 5 minutes left, I think. Well, I like to answer also using the examples from TEVA and Latteria Soresina. You mentioned the lack of forklifts drivers in Germany. This is something that is going to happen in Italy as well. Well, staff for the intralogistics or low-level staff will tend to disappear, first of all, for demographic factors. And the other example, the one by Latteria Soresina, referred to the people who have in their memory, be them artificial or real, they have process components, and these people must be convinced to take into account something different. Well, the two examples can be brought back to the phenomenon of digitalization, and there we find precisely the added value. And then I will go back to the last question. So precisely there we get in touch with this process fragmentation. Process fragmentation for us is something of extreme importance because it goes through an in-depth analysis of process know-how of the individual people, so shifting from a subjective to an objective approach, replacing the people. Well, we are speaking about taxes on robots to pay the people who will be left without a job. So this is something that might be envisaged for the future. And then machines must carry out this work in the best possible way. So you fragment the work in an activity of horizontal movement, vertical movement, and then handling. Handling is the interface between production line and intralogistics itself. So this is our viewpoint, and the added value is precisely there. I mean, in revising the processes via a different approach, a more objective approach. I mean, digitalizing an activity that already has an added value, but up to now with a subjective approach. Going back to what Spinelli said, Latteria Soresina, I was surprised when you started by saying what you said on revising processes as the essential element of this industrial revolution we are talking about. But at some point you said, well, yes, but the automated warehouse, you introduce that, and then you have automation. Before you would have manual forklifts, but after all, you're just stocking products and handling the goods in a different way. You were rather dismissive on that. I mean, you were not mentioning process revision, whereas I agree on other things you mentioned, because here we are speaking of change management. When in a company you introduce a new element, I wouldn't even speak of automation. I just speak about WMS for a manual warehouse. Well, that is an enormous change for the company, because there the workers who in the past would still work with paper, they had to do the picking and sorting with printed lists with all related difficulties and all the inefficiencies pertaining to that. Well, already with a system that is sort of guiding you, that improves your operation inside the warehouse, you have a process change, and this process change must be supported by the partner, by the provider that is giving you the solution. And there I fully agree with you, also by the company top management that must really guide this change. And now I'm going to draw to my conclusion. The idea of this tax allowance, tax credit, whatever it is an element, of course. There are people who say, well, the tax allowance is there, let's make an investment, whatever it is. Of course, that is a very short-sighted way of considering the issue. I mean, some small enterprises doing, I don't know, 17 million or 20 million of turnover. I mean, this enterprises really wanted to upgrade. They approached investments in innovation, which without these incentives, well, would have been an excessive risk for them. So this tax allowance enabled them to take the decision. Of course, they decided to spend, I don't know, 2 million, to invest 2 million when you have a turnover of 17 million. Of course, it's a big decision to make. But there are many companies that really believe in this digitalization process, and so they went in this direction. And that means, of course, investing in software and in hardware, and the added value, hardware and software. The software, as we said today, is the element that really provides a maximum added value, because the algorithm, the process control and organizing whatever is necessary. But it is also true that technological innovation also on hardware is a very important component. So if you have this truck, these stacker trucks, one solution may be better than the other, because it may have different technical elements if compared to the stacker truck of 20 years ago. Well, on the tax allowance, well, of course, that is a sort of flywheel for change, but it is not the objective. Obviously, if enterprises are using it to develop new processes, to digitalize the company, of course, that is the aim. If the aim is only getting the money and, well, organizing whatever just to get the money, on the warehouse, maybe I was too dismissive because I came from WMS, but not so much because people moved from paper to digital, but because VMS is not a revolution just in the warehouse. To have a VMS work, you have to revise all the libraries and the product libraries in the company are in some Excel of the marketing and not in RP. And customers, you may have some lists or and not others. So to make VMS work, I had to create a revolution in the company. And of course, people hated me. And there really, I did see the change. The automated warehouse is something that has been there for the last 40 or 50 years. So we only introduced a different way using a VMS that is already there. So there was not a real revolution. The real revolution will be there when we want Industry 4.0 in that warehouse. So we also want the production order, not only VMS. So it is that is a process requiring a number of steps. So, revolutions always have an impact on all the functions work. You cannot speak just of one function having to sort of drag everybody else along. Well, logistics was somehow more far-sighted, and so it, well, stress the need to change and revise. But since we are at the very middle of a supply chain, we have production to the back and those who sell to the front. Either we are able to manage all that, or else, well, production doesn't give us the products, and then, of course, we have problems with retails, and those who do marketing will ask you for things that the production is unable to guarantee. Then, if you do that, introducing systems becomes much easier because you have a good governance of the process. So the idea is not so much changing the process, but it is guaranteeing a governance of the process. It's not to be taken for granted that you have to change the process. You just have to introduce a digital system. Governance is what matters, because otherwise they are broken into small pieces. The supply chain must be a chain precisely, not a silos approach. That's it. Luca? And well, for me, digitalization is no longer something reversible. I mean, it is something quite necessary from now onwards. This is something that is going to develop. When there is a criticality, well, criticalities will be there for the economy, for resources in the next few years. So it is something that is just a must. It's not a choice. Is there any question? Is there any question from the audience? Otherwise, in the Eisen stand, there is a lunch for all of us, so you are welcome to go there. Thank you.